I don't know, between the working on this stuff for decades and Ron's introduction, I think I should quit while I'm ahead, but maybe I'll stay for a few minutes and talk. Thank you very much for those lovely introductions. We'll see what you think about the talk when we're done, but hopefully it'll be an interesting hour that we'll have together. So I want to talk about the promise of higher ed, what I think are some of the challenges in higher ed, and then highlight a couple of programs that I didn't actually evaluate myself, but I think are promising programs. And then also some work I've been doing on financial aid. I might, depending on how we're doing on time, give a little 2 cents, really just 2 cents on technology, or sort of, what's the promise of MOOCs for at least bending the curve, and for-profit institutions, but really not much there. So where do I want to begin? So I want to begin with the chart that makes economists' hearts sing generally. Economists don't generally agree on much, but we agree that this chart is pretty solid. What this chart shows is it's got average annual earnings on the y-axis, crossed with years of schooling, and you can see, is there a light here? You can see most people in the US at least actually complete at least 8th and 9th. After 9th grade is when we start to see dropout. So this is, not a lot of people. We're kind of bouncing around, not making much. But then following around 10th, 11th grade, we see a fairly linear relationship between earnings and years of schooling. So this relationship between earnings and years of schooling, economists who don't generally agree all agree that this relationship exists. We don't always agree on why it exists. That's another question. But I would argue that after years of papers that have tried to establish whether this is a causal relationship, meaning that if people are compelled to get more schooling, will they end up with more education? At least when we are dealing with small numbers of people getting more schooling, that there will be some increase in their earnings. I would say that the literature has converged on some measure of this relationship is causal, which explains why, and the fact that education is almost akin to mother's milk, you have almost every politician, every policymaker getting behind the idea that we need to improve the years of schooling for individuals as a policy platform. How many presidents are the education president, even though our education system is, especially K through 12, is largely a state and local system. The higher ed system is largely a state system, but nonetheless they're the education president because we understand that more schooling does generally make people a little better off. Also, if we want to think about ways in which we're going to really stimulate economic growth, if you think about what are the foundations of growth, you've got innovation, you've got capital, you've got labor. We need productive labor. Education is one of the inputs into making labor more productive. All right, so we can all agree on this. If we look at another labor market outcome, we can look at unemployment rates. You will notice that this is from the March 2016 CPS. So the unemployment rate in April was 4.1% for overall. Notice that for those who have a bachelor's degree or higher, it's not quite half that. On the other hand, for those who don't even have a high school diploma, it's almost twice that. So education is also, in the health field, we would say is protective, but against unemployment. But you can see it's people who have more schooling are also more likely to be employed. Another labor market outcome. Last, if you've taken your economics class, so if you've studied Ehrenberg and Smith really well, you know that when we think about the benefits to education, we think that there are benefits to the individual, private benefits. We think there are benefits to society, social benefits as well. And so a lot of economists have tried to look at both other private benefits beyond the labor market, but also try to push into some of those social benefits as well. So there are papers looking at, again, better employment, which is the flip side of not being unemployed. Looking at that individuals with more schooling are less likely to draw on government benefits. There's improved health outcomes, improved skills and health of the next generation. So if we can educate this generation, we'll also be seeing benefits with the children having better outcomes. And then if we also look at some of the other social outcomes, individuals with more schooling are less likely to make crime, they're more likely to vote, they're more likely to believe in free speech, they pay more taxes. And then Enrico Moretti has also documented that in cities where individuals are more highly educated, everybody does better. So there are spillovers to other workers as well. This all goes to the benefits of schooling. It's all great. We all sing. We believe it's a good thing. If we look forward, so it's true that these data are from 1992 to 2002, but as far as I can tell from David Otter's website and from his most recent papers, basically this still holds, which is if we look at where the importance of schooling going forward, I think we can also make that case as well. So what this chart says is, what they did was they categorized occupations by the different skills that are required. So this was Murnane and Levy, David Otter with Dick Murnane and Frank Levy. And they looked at 5 different skills. Does it require non-routine analytic skills? So that's where you've got to be thinking, obviously, and it's not very routine. So you've got to be flexible, you've got to be innovative, you might have to interact with people, but in a non-routine way. Non-routine interactive, again, I'm going to have to interact with people and make some decisions that are not going to just necessarily be routine. I've got to be able to respond to things. I've got to be flexible. And then you have routine cognitive, which I hope there are not too many medical students here, but I'm going to put many parts of medicine into this category. I think many people believe that when you go to your GP, they're starting to have checklists of what they go through. So it's becoming a little bit routine, and what you need the doctor there for is to help the things that are a little bit different, but a lot of medical examination is actually pretty routine. And then you have the manual skills, some of which are non-routine and some of which are routine. The thing that characterizes routine tasks, whether they be manual, whether they be cognitive, is that you can program a computer to do them. Because if you can articulate the steps that go into a process, you can typically program a machine or a computer to do those steps. You have to be able to categorize the steps, but if you can do so, technology might be able to do it better, faster, maybe less expensively, I'm not sure, depends. So if you think about as we have these huge technological advances that we've been having, if you want to think about the places where we will still have an advantage with our brains, it's in the non-routine types of jobs. And so not surprisingly, as technology has been chasing along, the types of occupations that have been growing are those that are non-routine, whereas those that are routine have been declining because we've been replacing workers with technology. Another way to think about that is every couple of years, the BLS tries to project employment growth. And if you look at their employment growth projections from 2014 to 2024, you can see that they're expecting that employment growth will be fastest for those occupations that require a bachelor's degree or more, an associate's degree, or at least some kind of long-term training, meaning you need higher education of some sort, something past high school, whether it's longer-term training, whether it's actually time in a community college with an associate's degree, whether it's a bachelor's degree or more. So all of these are reasons by way of saying that we have documented that there are economic benefits and there are social benefits to schooling up till now, and I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that the pressure will actually build going forward for these to be even more important. However, I would argue we've got 3 challenges facing post-secondary education. So we've documented how important we believe it is, and yet I think there are some challenges that we're going to have to address. I'm actually in this talk going to spend most of my time on the first bullet, which is that I first want to document that I believe that we've made progress in terms of enrollment. Actually, that'll take exactly 1 slide. But that when it comes to completion, we've got a lot of challenges there. And the question is why, and what might we be able to do about it? And then I will also just mention student borrowing, which I think is a big challenge for many students, particularly in certain sectors, and maybe talk a little bit about bending the cost curve in higher ed. So first, making the case about the change in enrollment. So what this chart is the percentage of the population that has these different years of schooling, so less than high school, that's actually this line here, whether they're a high school graduate. Some college is a very nebulous term that is made famous by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It means someone who has started a post-secondary program of some kind but not received a degree or a certificate. We don't measure certificates. So they have some college. So it could be anywhere between 13 or 15 years of schooling, which makes it a really kind of a mushy category. You can see that there's the purple line up here is associate's degree. We have this light blue, which is those who have a bachelor's degree and no more. And then those in this orange have more than a bachelor's degree. And what I've done is normalize each of those categories to 0, or to 100, I should say, in 1992, so that what you're measuring over time is the change for each of the different levels of schooling. So what immediately jumps out is that for both those who have less than a high school degree and those who are high school graduates, we've seen declining proportions of them in the population. More individuals are getting through high school or going on past high school in 2015 than in 1992. If we go to the very top, you see that the fastest growth was in those who are getting an associate's degree. That's not surprising if you think about community colleges. Community colleges are located in almost every city and neighborhood. They are low cost. They have open door admissions policies generally, meaning that anybody can enroll as long as they have at least a high school degree or what they call an ability to benefit. Community colleges have also tried to be very responsive to the needs of the local city, the local residents. So they're often providing courses not just for young 18, 19, 20-year-olds, but also for older individuals that might be interested in retraining or taking a course or two to supplement what they're doing. Or might just wanting to learn how to do photography and something completely for leisure. But nonetheless, community colleges are nimble. They can expand. They're often offering courses that are at odd hours, so in the evenings, on weekends. They were very early in the online courses and distance education because they understood that their students often were working full-time or had other responsibilities, and they needed to develop schedules that could be adaptable. This is why, especially with the low cost, the ease of being just in your neighborhood, you can see the growth in the percentage of the population with an associate's degree. But you also see that there was an increase in those with a bachelor's degree, but you notice that both the associate's degree started to level off in the last year or so, and also those with a bachelor's degree, because now folks are going on, right? Folks are getting a bachelor's degree and they're going on and they're starting to get more. In any event, the bottom line is that over the last 25 years or so, we see that the population is enrolling in post-secondary schooling, right? So I think we've done, I'm not going to say we couldn't do better, and obviously it's uneven as to what individuals are doing, but I think we've done reasonably well in terms of enrollment. However, it's not even. So this is a chart by Chetty, Hendren, Klein, Sias, Turner. The number of authors on papers, it's gotten lots. So Chetty and co-authors using tax return data, where they're classifying on the x-axis, so they've matched parents and children, and on the x-axis, if they've ranked the parental income, so the 100 is the wealthiest parents, really it's 1 here, is the first percentile. And then what they did on the y-axis is they say what percentage of the children in each of those categories, of those parental categories, are enrolled in college as of age 19. They did it for 3 groups of birth cohorts of children. Their paper was focused on the differences between these lines. I look at these differences and say not much change. And basically what you see is it's a rather linear relationship, strong relationship between how much your parents earn and your likelihood of going to college. If there was no relationship, this would just be a straight line somewhere. But what you can see is actually there's almost a 70 percentage point difference between the lowest percentile and the highest percentile in the likelihood that the children are enrolled in college at age 19. If we went out later, many children from lower income families just take longer to enroll, and I will show you a chart on that later. So if we were to go out lower, obviously I don't think that this line would be quite as steep, but it is a reminder that we have a lot of inequality when it comes to actually who is going on to schooling. That there's a strong relationship between those who already have a lot and their children, what kind of access to resources their children have. They double down on this by also showing that it's not only are the children likely to go to college, but when they develop a measure of college quality, which is basically they've looked at the average earnings of graduates of that college, again using their tax data, but nonetheless that would be one measure of something about the graduates of the college. Again, you can see that the children of wealthier families are more likely to go to better colleges than are children of poorer families as well. So education becomes this double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, those who get more schooling, and many people believe it is the way out of, say, poverty, it's a way to do better as an adult. On the other hand, it's also part of what's maintaining our inequality, since those who already are doing very well, their children are more likely to get the same tools, the education that allows the children to continue to do well. So it's a double-edged sword. How can we possibly break this? So just before I talk about a couple of little ways around the edges we can start to break this, let me tell you part of what I'm also concerned about. And this goes to quality to the extent that it's causal. What this table shows you is, it's again focused on completion. And it says, what does completion look like after 6 years based on the type of institution individuals are enrolled in first? Now, you guys are all at Cornell. For most of you who are undergraduates, those of you who are graduate students, I presume it's not your first institution. But for those of you who are undergraduates, it probably was the one institution of higher ed that you've attended. Fair enough? Yeah? Participatory part of the audience? In community colleges, for example, students are often in and out of school. So by the time so if you catch someone, I'll show you a chart that's going to really highlight that. But students are in and out of school. So this is the first type of institution that they attend. Doesn't mean it's the last, doesn't mean it's the only. So just keep that in mind. But if we look at it's their first institution, if we look at all students, so they started in 2003, 2004. This is the most recent data for which we can look out this far, meaning 6 years. About 31% of them have attained a bachelor's degree 6 years later, another 9% an associate degree, another 9% a certificate. So about half have achieved some kind of degree or certificate after 6 years. Notice that about 35% though have no degree and they're not enrolled anymore. Now let's look at it by the type of institution they first enroll in. If we look at those who started in a public 2-year institution, that's only about a third have some kind of degree or certificate after 6 years. Almost half of them are no longer enrolled and have no degree or certificate. That's a big striking difference with either kind of 4-year institution, where it's 2/3 have achieved a degree or certificate after 6 years, and only about 20% are not enrolled and have no degree. So there are big differences in the outcomes depending on the first type of institution students enroll in. Now, many people look at these data and they say, well, those 2-year students didn't want a bachelor's degree. They were only aiming for the certificate, okay, but only 8.5% of them got the certificate. But they didn't have the same aspirations as the students enrolled in 4-year. Okay, fair enough. So what this table does, now it's true, it's going to base what students' aspirations are based on a question that they answer. Now, we economists prefer to judge people by what they do rather than by what they say they want to do. But let's take it at face value. And so what you can see is that among students who start in a 2-year college, 58% say they want a bachelor's degree. So they started at the 2-year college for some other reason, probably because it was less expensive, it was closer to home. They also might have needed to take a bunch of remedial or developmental education courses, which are more likely to be offered at a 2-year college. That compares to 89% of those who actually start in a 4-year college. All right, so among those 58% who said they wanted a BA, 6 years later, only 17% of them have actually completed a BA. Only 15% have a completed associate's degree, which a 2-year college student often will complete along the way. They don't have to. You can transfer to a 4-year college without completing the associate's degree, but it's common to get that along the way. You can compare that to those who start in a 4-year college and say they want a bachelor's degree, where 62% of them have achieved a bachelor's degree along the way. So something is going wrong for these students. Now, it could be that their aspirations are just out of line, and I understand that for some fraction of them that just made just unrealistic. But something else is going wrong, and what could that be? And I think this is one of our bigger challenges in post-secondary education. So why do we have this high rate of non-completion, especially in 2-year colleges? I'm going to focus on the first few especially. So my favorite explanation is I believe they have complicated lives. I will show you that many of these students are not your traditional 18, 19, 20-year-old whose parents are at home and they're living at home or not at home, but their parents are still supporting them. They have no children, they are not working, or maybe if they're working, it's just a little part-time job. But rather, they are older students with other responsibilities. And if you've got a sick kid versus getting to class, guess what you're going to do? You're going to take care of your sick kid, at least I hope so. So if you have a complicated life, it can be very hard to juggle the many priorities. And schooling sometimes just doesn't rise to the top of the pile. Academic preparation. This is going to our inequality issues, because I will show you that students are starting two-year college, many of them, by some estimates, 2.5 million, need some form of developmental education. And so that means that our K through 12 system is not serving them well, is not preparing them for a post-secondary education. Ineffective curriculum and lack of adequate institutional support. I'm not going to talk about head-end, but I'm going to talk about two programs which are trying to deal with that. And then we'll see if we get to cost. So first, when we think about complicated lives, one way to think about this is an analysis that was done at the Department of Education, is to break down and to characterize what they're called risk factors. And the way I really think about it is what is going to characterize a traditional student from a non-traditional student. So we're looking at things like, did you delay entry into post-secondary schooling by more than 1 year? Are you enrolled part-time? I think one of the characteristics of the programs I'm going to show you is that full-time enrollment actually makes a big difference. Are you working more than 35 hours a week versus, or did you not work? Are you independent of your parents? Independent students tend to be older, married. They may have other dependents themselves. Do they have other dependents? Are you a single parent? Did you not receive your high school diploma? Remember, you can enroll in a community college without your diploma as long as you have an ability to benefit. So if we look at the characteristics of students, again by their first institution, at two-year institutions, public four-year institutions, and private not-for-profit institutions, I just want to draw your attention to the bottom parts of these charts, which are those who are traditional students. They have zero risk factors, maybe some of you. Actually, in the private institutions, you can see that half of students, as they are starting, fall into this traditional category, as compared to only less than 10% of students starting in a two-year institution. Most students at a two-year institution are coming with many of those risk factors compared to those in a four-year college. Again, I just think those risk factors make it very difficult to prioritize. I've been dean for about 3.5 years, and I've developed some very important principles by which I dean. And one of them is, okay, it's very profound, so I hope you're taking notes. There are only 24 hours in the day. And I say that when I'm thinking about, well, one of these students with complicated lives. I say that when I worry about all the things our students are doing. I say that when I worry about all the demands we put on our faculty. I can give you more money, I can buy you another car, I can buy you a new house. I can't give you another hour in a day as much as I try, So time is one of those things we just can't get around. So when people are juggling many priorities, something just has to give. Something has to give. And so that's the reason why this is one of my, it's a little squishy, but I think that is like the way into really understanding why we have these high rates of non-completion. We've done a good job of trying to encourage more people into our post-secondary system, but many of these people are people who are trying to juggle many other responsibilities in their lives. So I think that's a large part of it. What about preparation? Are they prepared? So this is data from the National Post-Secondary AIDS Survey from 2012. And they asked they asked of students, did they ever take a remedial class? And by ever, what they really mean is since high school, versus did you take one in the last academic year? So you can see that among all students, almost a third have ever taken a remedial class since high school. And so by one measure, almost 1/3 of students are coming to a post-secondary institution and they're not ready They're not fully ready for college level work. If you look at that among two-year college students, that's 40%, compared to only about 22% in the public four-year system, and about 15% in private not-for-profits. If you look at those who've taken a remedial class in the last year, you can also see it's also very high. So remedial education, developmental education, by some estimates, costs the US about over $3 billion a year. And the thing is, if you look at evaluations of how effective these kinds of classes are, they usually don't count for credit. So while you're enrolled in your developmental education course, it's not actually moving you towards getting a degree. And if you look at whether forcing students to take developmental education actually speeds them along in their degree attainment or keeps them enrolled in school, the answer is really mixed. So the best evidence typically is based on, I should finish my sentence, the best evidence is based on regression discontinuity designs. So typically institutions will give students an assessment test, determine whether they need to take developmental education. If you score above it, some cutoff, you don't have to take it. If you score below it, you do. So if they compare the outcomes of students right around that cutoff, in different states and different times, researchers have found different things as to whether students who've been required to take developmental education or not have actually improved their outcomes. It's confusing, to tell you the truth, and I think it leads many people to believe, okay, we get that these students may not be quite ready for college level work, but it's not clear that the way we're delivering this curriculum, the way that we're delivering this material is really very effective. And the other truth is, many students, when they get trapped in that, when they start in those developmental education courses, never really get out of them. They don't count towards credit, they get discouraged, they just don't have the time, they just don't make progress. So I want to talk about two programs which have tried to address this, because I think many of us believe that this is the first, so dealing with developmental education and making it more effective, especially for workers who have more complicated lives, is the first most promising way to try to address non-completion, and probably the most important factors. So the first program I want to highlight is Washington State's IBEST program. And IBEST is the Integrated Basic Education and Skills Training Program. It was developed, I think, around 2007 or so, or maybe earlier. And it was designed to increase the degree and credential attainment among students who were required to take developmental education classes, remedial education, and who were also enrolled in an occupational skills program. The idea was to target high growth areas. So you can see that the programs are in like medical assistants, nurse's aide, office manager, welder. These are meant to be high growth areas, at least in Washington, and so that the individuals will be likely to get a job. And the key part of the program is that they pair up a basic skills instructor with the occupational skills instructor. They essentially co-teach, so the students are getting their basic skills in the context of occupational training. They get college credit for the occupational training, not necessarily for the remedial part. But the idea is to pair it so that the basic skills are relevant, and it also helps them get right into their occupational training so that they're acquiring college credits right away. You can see it is a bit more expensive than a typical CTE or career and technical education program, because they're compensating the faculty a bit more for the fact that co-teaching actually takes a bit more time, and you have to coordinate, and you need some administration coordination as well. So this was evaluated by researchers at the Community College Center at Teachers College in New York. And what they did was they have 3 different ways in which they do their analysis. I'm just going to focus on one. So these are regression-adjusted estimates, where they're going to compare students, the IBEST students, to students who took at least one occupational course but was not part of IBEST. So if they look at outcomes, you can see that the probability of earning any college credit is substantially larger among those that were in the IBEST program compared to those in the regular CTE. 57% versus 18%, and this difference is statistically significant. It's not surprising. If you look at whether they received any CTE credit, it almost basically mirrors the total college credit, because largely they're getting their college credits through their occupational program. So they get more college credit. That looks like it's the same slide. So, okay. If we look, though, whether they were likely to persist to the next year, we do not find that the IBEST students do better. In fact, they're slightly less likely. This difference is not statistically significant, but they are slightly less likely to persist into the next year, so that's a bit of a knock. On the other hand, they're significantly more likely to have received an award. Most of the awards that they are likely to have received are certificates, not associate's degrees. If we look at wages and hours worked, we actually see that in terms, so this is pre-post, so not all of the students actually had wages before they started. So there's that. And two, this was done in 2007, 2008, 2009, just as Washington slid into a recession. So this made that the authors believe this might explain why everybody's wages were going down. We don't know. It'll have to be replicated. But you can see that, so the IBEST students, in terms of the hours worked, the change was smaller than the change for the non-IBEST students, but we're not seeing any real statistical impact in the labor market. Nevertheless, this program has been held up as an example. I actually think the promise of doing occupational basic skills in the context of training is one that there's evidence from other places. PPV, before it closed its doors, did a sectoral training program that looked pretty effective, is one that is promising because I think it just makes the developmental program more effective. This program, okay, thank you. This program looks like it improves the credits earned, looks like they're more likely to get a certificate. The labor market outcomes, a little bit TBD. It's not looking great, but on the other hand, they were looking at the outcomes during the Great Recession. So I think I'm willing to suspend belief until we know more. It would be nice to see this done, evaluated more rigorously, but based on what they have, I think it looks like it's a promising program. The second program that I want to talk about was evaluated by MDRC, and it was conducted, they did conduct a randomized evaluation. And they conducted an evaluation of a program that's being run by CUNY, their Accelerated Study and Associate Programs, ASAP. This program was also designed to help students that were required to take developmental education to get them through to an associate's degree within 3 years. So to help them not just drop out, but to get them, to have them take the developmental education programs, but to get them into regular credit programs as well and get them to their associate's degree and onward and onto a four-year college as well, but to do it faster and more effectively. So what did they do? First of all, as part of this program, the students had to be attending full-time. So that was a requirement of the program. They also had to, I don't think it was a requirement, but they were strongly encouraged to take their developmental education courses early. So in a typical student walking into one of the CUNY campuses, this experiment was done, or this evaluation was done on 3 of the campuses. Typically, they would be urged to take their developmental education courses early, but they didn't have to. In ASAP, they were really very strongly encouraged to do so. They had enhanced advising. So for example, on one of the campuses, the typical ratio of students to advisor was 600 to 1. In the ASAP program on the same campus, it was 60 to 1, so 10 times different. So the students met with their advisors much more regularly than the typical student. They also were given career information. Again, the ASAP students actually took advantage of the career information. The typical students did not in the control group. And they had special tutoring services. In addition, they did something which in other places they call learning communities, which they have groups of students, because these students typically are not residential. So they come and take classes and they don't get to know their classmates. And we all know that that is part of what makes a college experience worthwhile. You don't just learn from the professors in the classroom, you learn from your classmates. So in an effort to try to create greater community, they link courses and they have the students take classes together. And sometimes what they also do is have the professors in these linked courses coordinate their curricula. So if you're taking developmental English, for example, you're taking a writing course and you're taking a history class, your writing assignments in the writing course are linked up with the history class or the medical science classes or whatever you might be doing. And then in addition, the students received a tuition waiver, so this has a financial aid component that covered the gap between tuition and whatever the financial aid was going to be offering them, plus a Metro card for public transportation, which they would get when they would meet with their advisor monthly. And it was a Metro card worth about $110 or so non-trivial in New York City. To be eligible for this evaluation, so these are the characteristics of both the treatment and control students. So they were poor, so they came from families with, that were 200% or less below the poverty line or were eligible for a Pell Grant. They needed to take 1 or 2 developmental education classes. They essentially hadn't completed much post-secondary schooling. They were New York City residents. Of course, they had to be willing to attend full-time, and they were in an ASAP eligible major. Again, they were focused on majors where they thought that there was employment afterwards. So they had about almost 900 students in this study. So what did they find? So first, the students that were in ASAP nearly had twice the rate of completing a degree within 3 years than those in the control group. So 40% of those in the program group completed a degree, an associate's degree, compared to only 22% of those in the control group. This is a really big impact for an intervention on a community college campus. In addition, 25% of those students who enrolled in ASAP then transferred to a 4-year college, which beats the national average of transfers among 2-year college students, compared to only 17% who represent the control group, so they represent what happens in general. If we look at total credits earned, this difference is statistically significant. You can see that the programmer group earned more credits than the control group. So this is a pretty exciting intervention for community college. This one is not as much trying to do curricular intervention. It included financial aid. It did require the students attend full-time, and it involved more advising. And you can see really big impacts as a result. CUNY, not surprising, given this, this was a random assignment evaluation, so pretty rigorous, is now rolling this out to, they're trying to expand it to 13,000 students by next fall. And they're working with MDRC to continue evaluating, because oftentimes what happens, these small programs, you find big impacts. As you scale, not so much, but they certainly want to see whether they can scale this to be a bigger program. Okay, so those are the first 2 kinds of interventions I want to talk about. The third is one that I've been involved in. Some of my work has been with MDRC. Actually, my work has all been with MDRC in some shape or form, and then I'll talk a little bit about a couple other studies as well. So one way in which people from the federal government, thinking should we do this to Pell Grants, to others, have thought, well, when it comes to grant aid, often the way it's given is you are promised, you're given a scholarship for $1,000. Here you go, here's your check for $1,000. Bye, have fun, if you enjoy your classes. And many people have said, well, shouldn't we be requiring the students put some effort into their studies if we're going to be helping them with their schooling? So we're going to call that kind of a scholarship a performance-based scholarship. So it's a scholarship that you're not just given at the beginning of the semester, but where the money is promised to you as long as you meet certain academic benchmarks. Pell Grants technically fall into this category because in order to continue to receive your Pell Grant, you have to have some minimum GPA, but it's administered unevenly across campuses. It's, they give you the money up front, and it's really more, will you get it for the next semester if you don't have a high enough GPA? But with a performance-based scholarship, you first have to achieve the benchmark, and then you're given the money. So MDRC has done a couple of randomized evaluations on this, and I'm going to show you some of what they've learned. And then there's also been, for example, the West Virginia Promise Scholarship is basically a form of a performance-based scholarship, and there are others as well. So what have we learned about? And so this chart was, why might these work? The idea really is that, okay, so we all know I should work hard in school. If I do well in school, I'm going to do well in the labor market, and that will be my reward. For many students, that reward may just be too far down the road to really be meaningful. So if you can bring the benefit to hard work forward in the form of getting the scholarship, you may provide an incentive for them to work harder while in school. That's the idea. Let's see if it actually makes a difference. So this is just, I'm not going to show you the parameters of all of the programs, but this is one of them. So this was the first one I was involved in. It was a program that we called Opening Doors, and it was conducted in 2 community colleges in New Orleans, in Louisiana. Students would get $250 upon enrolling at least half-time. They would get another $250 after midterms, but they had to earn at least a C average. The graduation rates from these community colleges was so low, a C is actually a meaningful grade point average. And you get another $500 if you ended the semester and passed all your classes with at least a 2.0 GPA. And you could do this for 2 semesters for a total of $2,000. So in this setting, this was meaningful money, and these were meaningful benchmarks. So did it actually change behavior? Not this. This is a different experiment. But a question I've always worried about is we sometimes observe outcomes, but do we actually see that anybody changed their behavior? What was in the black box? So Lisa Barrow, who was a former student of mine, and I did, this was another randomized evaluation conducted with MDRC, but in New York City and California. I'm not going to go into, they were both performance-based scholarships, but what we looked at was how the students spent their time if they were in the treatment group versus the control group. And what we found in both places was, and the stars tell you that the treatment groups were significantly different than the control group, is that students were more likely to focus on academic activities. They spent a bit more time on their academics if they were in the treatment group. We had a measure of the quality of their academic input, how well they were focused, how whether they were asking questions and things like that. And we saw that there was a decrease in their non-academic activities. Again, there's 24 hours in the day, so if you're spending more time on academics, you got to be doing less somewhere else. We did not find an impact on employment, which we had expected. So basically, the small gains that they spent on academic activities, they compensated for with some non-academic activities. So okay, so we saw that it changed behavior a little bit on the margin, but does it actually change outcomes? Back to Louisiana opening doors. So if we looked at whether did it have an impact on whether students were enrolled in any course in the first semester? So this is a difference between the treatment group in the dark blue and the control group in the light blue of just a few percentage points. The 1 star means it's significant at the 10% value, at the 10% level. We didn't expect a big increase on enrollment in this setting because in order to be eligible for the experiment, the students had to be on campus. And that's where we recruited them from. So anybody who got up the interest to actually come to the campus, the ghost of our random assignment. We didn't expect, if you already were on campus, whether you're in the treatment or control group, we didn't expect a big difference. But you can see if we go to the second semester, the students who were in the treatment group were much more likely to enroll in the second semester. If we look at their total credits attempted, regular credits attempted, the difference being developmental credits, total credits earned, because just because you attempt a credit doesn't mean you'll actually earn it, and regular credits earned, there were significant differences in the credits earned, not so much attempted in the first semester, and significant differences between all of them in the second semester. A lot of the second semester differences are driven by the fact that they were more likely to be enrolled in the first place in the treatment group. But you can see that there were impacts on educational attainment even in the second semester. And if we go into years, we see that the biggest gains were in the first year in terms of credits earned, the difference between treatment and control. Not such a big difference in the second year, but if we sum up the credits in the first 2 years, we saw that there was an increase. Not huge, but nonetheless, there was some improvement in their educational attainment. These are slides from, or graphs from a paper that Judith Scott Clayton did looking at the West Virginia Promise program, which is a program eligible for all residents of West Virginia, as long as in high school they had a GPA of 3.0, that they scored above a certain level on the ACT or SAT, and they were willing to enroll full-time in college. And if they did that, they were eligible for a scholarship that was worth, I think, maybe $1,000. I can't remember exactly what it was. And in order to continue receiving it for another year, they had to maintain the B average. They had to have a B average, and they had to continue being enrolled full-time. So if you look, and so she is, and again, you were eligible based on an ACT. I think this cutoff is like, I wanted to say 21. So she's looking just above and below that cutoff to see whether eligibility for the program made a difference. And what she found is that it made not much of a difference in terms of total semesters over 4 years. It didn't make a big difference in school year earnings, which I think she was expecting given that they were given money. But it did have, this is actually a slightly bigger gap. It's telling me. It's on the computer? Ah. No. It says computer. I'm almost done. Oh, well, we have a power cord. It's happy again. All right. And there is a slight jump in GPA, cumulative GPA. So what she found is not such a big difference in persistence or in earnings, but she found some gain in terms of total credits earned and some in terms of cumulative GPA. More generally, she found evidence that the students were making, that there were bigger impacts on the thresholds that were being used to determine eligibility. So for example, the students that were eligible were more likely to be enrolled full-time. The students that were eligible were more likely to maintain this 3.0 GPA. And she also found that they were more likely to complete their BA within 4 years. So she found that they were more likely to complete their bachelor's degree more quickly and to have a slightly higher GPA, so maybe more effectively. Than those who weren't quite eligible. Josh Angris, along with Phil Oriopoulos and then slightly different co-authors, have also done 2 randomized evaluations at an institution in Canada looking at performance-based scholarships. In the first one, they found no impacts on GPA or based on the incentives for men, but they found sizable impacts for women. When they ran it again, but a different program, I mean, they were trying to learn, they found no significant impacts on grades or credits earned, et cetera, the second time they ran it. So the history is a bit mixed when it comes to these performance-based scholarships. There's some evidence that it may improve a little bit on educational attainment in terms of credits earned, but not, my own evidence suggests that the students are actually doing a little bit of response in terms of spending more time on their academics than on other stuff. But it's not like it's going to be the savior for really getting more for our money in terms of financial aid and getting students to really be more responsive. And again, I think that's partially because of the complicated lives. So what's the marginal incentive that this money is going to do? Lisa Barrow and I tried to look at the fact that if you believed the theory, which is that students who had, let's say, have a high discount rate, so students who are who are not very focused on the future, who are very present-oriented, would be the most likely to respond to the incentive. Because what I argued was, we all know that if you do better in school, you're going to do better in the labor market, but that could be a few years off. So what the scholarship does is bring the rewards closer. So who's going to be more responsive to that? Not someone who was patient to begin with, but the student who was a little bit more impatient to begin with. Or the other group that's going to be more responsive are those who can be. Those who have complicated lives may not have a lot of elasticity in their day to spend more time studying. If you've got a full-time job, you've got to take care of the kids and your parents are at home and you've got to make dinner and clean the house. You know, how much extra time is there in the day to study and to focus on your academics? So the other group you might expect to be more responsive would be those without children. So looking at our data in New York, we found some suggestive evidence that was consistent with that. It wasn't a slam dunk, but it was somewhat consistent with that. I think that that is something we should be thinking about as we design and think about these kinds of interventions. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and talk for a minute about tuition and cost. This is the economics public service slide. Ron, you're going to back me up on this one. Does it just grind your teeth every year when the press comes out with, oh my gosh, look how expensive it is. Look at the sticker price for going to a four-year college. Do you grind your teeth? Yes, okay, yes, all right. He's saying, just go on. So yes, this is the sticker price, the published price of going to a private four-year not-for-profit institution. What drives economists crazy is that, and many of you know, that's not the price that most people pay when they go to school. Many people are getting grants, scholarships, other forms of financial aid. Loans wouldn't count in this version of financial aid. So if we take out financial aid and we look at the net price, we can see that it's much lower. So whereas the published price of going to a four-year institution has increased, I think it's about 90% between 1990 and 2015, the net price has increased much more slowly. It still has increased, but much more slowly. If we look at the public institutions, it's the same story. They're less expensive to begin with, but the increase has been much slower if we actually account for the grants, the tax credits, and all the other ways in which people have help paying for school. And a little known stylized fact is if we look at the net price in public two-year institutions, it's actually been negative over the last several years if we account for financial aid in that as well. Nevertheless, this is tuition. The cost to students is that tuition minus what, so even if we take net tuition, minus, especially at a public institution, what the state is subsidizing, and then they got to pay the rest, right? So for many students, even though tuition has been going up more slowly than we think, we also see the students are more likely to be borrowing. And this is real. So this is, it's not the most recent data because I like looking at how much have students borrowed over 6 years. And unfortunately, the Department of Education surveys are not more current than this. But you can see that over 6 years, at least as far as the second follow-up surveys, you can see that in public institutions, well, that hasn't changed so much, it's about 40%. There has been an increase among those going to public four-year institutions, a small increase among those going for private, not-for-profit. The place where we see the borrowing going on is in the for-profit sector. That is the real story on student debt, in my humble opinion. We could talk about just what a crazy business model the for-profit sector is, because here we have institutions which their only revenue is the tuition that students pay. Most of the students aren't paying that tuition. They're getting financial aid, which is backed up by who? The federal government. There is something called the 90-10 rule. So these institutions do have to come up with 10% that is not covered by financial aid. But guess what counts in that 10%? As just one example, veterans' GI benefits don't count. So what have they been trying to do? Enroll veterans because they can be actually requiring their non-veteran students to take out more than that. So this is where the real increase in student borrowing has come in. In addition, this only looks at undergraduate borrowing. The other place where you see very high rates of borrowing is for graduate school. It's something we don't know very much about. For those of you looking for dissertations, I think it's something to look at because I don't think we know very much about the returns to many of these graduate programs and what the borrowing for students and the repayment rates really look at, because everybody's been focusing at the undergraduate level. But there's, when you think about law schools and medical schools and other types of professional degrees, there's a lot of borrowing going on there. If you look at, this is again undergraduate student loans, if you look at how much students are actually taking out, you can see that the highest rates, I think this number, so this again, this is over 6 years. I think this number is higher obviously today. So there's been increases at all levels as students are borrowing more, especially, well, I don't have the for-profits on here, but you see the students are borrowing more at all levels. So the question is, so I'm actually someone, if you look at the actual expenditure per student in many institutions in higher ed, there hasn't been huge change over time. The reason why tuition has gone up is because the states aren't subsidizing for the students quite as much. So the cost to students is going up. I don't expect states to turn around and say, oh my gosh, you're right, we missed it. We got to start subsidizing our higher ed more. They've got many other things to contend with, including rapidly rising healthcare costs, and in many cases, pension costs and prison costs. I mean, that's important as well. Okay, online, I don't mean to be flip about that, but in California, where they're really trading off between prisons and schools, it's a heartbreaking decision that they're having, trade-offs that they're having to make, in my humble opinion. So I don't expect to see states suddenly reversing trends. The state subsidies have dropped from about 44% in the 60s, 70s to like 20% today. I don't expect that to turn around. So the cost that is being borne by consumers, by students and their families, has been going up, and it is real. So if we're going to make it easier for students, we're going to have to find a way to bend the curve even more. And so many people have argued technology can help. That if we have a gigantic MOOC, it's got to be less expensive, and we can educate more students for less. It's got to be that the one faculty member teaching thousands and thousands of students is going to be less expensive than having other faculty members teach. I am somebody who's a little bit on the skeptical side. My ears are open, I'm listening, and I'm not trying to be anti-technology, but I think it depends on the question one is trying to ask. If one is asking about access, I think that having online education, there's unquestionably, if the choice is between that and nothing, that's just a no-brainer in terms of the benefits. If the choice is between whether the quality of education will be the same as a MOOC or some kind of online education versus being in a classroom with a faculty member, I think the verdict is out on whether the quality is actually the same. There have been some randomized evaluations which suggest in some settings it might be about the same. Others which suggest it's not, and especially not for some students. And I'm also somebody that's not entirely confident that the costs will be lower. Princeton has experimented with this to some extent. The broadcast costs are very high because you can't just take an iPhone and put it up in front of a professor and then put that online and expect students to think that's really high quality. So they have to be produced, they have to be edited, and if you're doing a course that's timely, it doesn't have a very long shelf life. So I think the verdict is out on the cost, and I haven't seen anybody, here's dissertation topic number 2, I haven't seen anybody who's really done a good understanding of costs. I know Ithaca, the company Ithaca is trying to do that, and Bill Bowen, but I haven't seen it yet. And I think really understanding who benefits in what situations and where and how best to use this, we don't understand well either. But I'm a little bit, I have to admit that I'm not someone that's rushing to the bandwidth in terms of when it's the trade-off between, okay, can we save costs, generate the same quality education, but online versus in person? I'm just not fully convinced. So then my last slide is about, well, what's the role of the for-profit sector? As you might imagine from my earlier comments where I don't really get the business model, I will grant that for-profit institutions have been very nimble in the post-secondary space. They've been very good at innovating in terms of having advisors and faculty who are really in touch with their students. They've been nimble in terms of responding to where the demand is for skilled workers or workers with whatever skills in the local area. I think they've been better at partnering with industry to try to meet those demands. At the same time, I think, and they've also filled in where community colleges have been overburdened. And in fact, that's where you can see the biggest growth in not-for-profit, in these for-profit institutions, is in areas where the public sector has just been inundated by students. So they have been there to try to meet the demand of students. On the other hand, when people have tried to evaluate whether there's actually an economic benefit to going to for-profit institutions, let's just say the evidence has not been very, very compelling. So we need to know more. This is not to say that every for-profit institution is not worth its value, but it's to say that we seriously need to know more, especially in an industry where the business model is not necessarily aligned with high quality and really trying to get students to have good outcomes. Okay, so I'm basically done. So I think that education is an important avenue for upward mobility, I guess, for many individuals. On the other hand, I think we've got some real persistent challenges, including the fact that our higher education system is very tied into the existing inequality in our economy, and the fact that those students that are newer to the higher education system that may be coming out of K through 12 systems that didn't quite prepare them for college, so they're getting stuck in remedial education, are the ones who are being least well served in higher ed. I think there are some promising approaches, including requiring full-time enrollment. I think that really means aggressively encouraging individuals to go when they're younger and they don't have as many demands on their time. But I think requiring the full-time employment, being creative about combining developmental education with occupational skills so that the classes are relevant and you can help the students move through more quickly. I think that plays a role. In terms of financial aid is very important. Whether making financial aid contingent on performance is key. I think it can play a small role. I don't think it's going to be the watershed reform that's ahead of us. So I think we're making some progress, but I think we have much to do. Thank you.
would you like to call on people? Commissioner Rouse would be glad to call on people for questions. Let me just urge you to stand up and speak loudly and clearly, because it's fairly easy for you to hear us in front when you're in the audience. It's rather hard for people to hear other people in the audience.
So given your suspicion that it's complicated lives that are really inferior to education, are there, so it wasn't clear to me that the programs that you were discussing were primarily aimed at addressing that, like you said, they don't add hours to the day. Are there programs underway that are more directly aimed at trying to make it easier to combine completing college with the complicated life? It seems to me that's part of the thought behind the online education, is that you can sort of do it around your schedule, you don't have to worry about commuting and adding that kind of time. Are there other programs that you've seen that show promise on that?
So first of all, I think that those programs do deal with complicated lives in sort of a hidden way. So one is, a lot of the adult learners that are in developmental education have complicated lives. They're adult learners. They weren't well served, obviously, and many of them are actually working or have worked and have families and responsibilities. And so by, for example, combining the Dev Ed with the occupational training and making that more effective, they also have to be part of career programs, because one of the problems for students that are stuck in developmental education is that they're taking these classes, it's not leading anywhere, and then if it's also, even the occupational classes that they get for credit, if it's not really well structured, they end up taking 30 credits, and only 10 of them are actually going to help lead to a degree. So that was another feature of IBEST that I didn't really emphasize, but it's meant to be part of a career program. So they're helping to make it more effective by helping them, the time that they're spending in school is more effective. In the ASAP program, I would argue it's true, it's got the full-time enrollment, which I think cuts against, for people who are truly already need to work, et cetera. One, they did have a pretty robust tuition, because you don't have to pay tuition, they waived all that so they could reduce hours. I don't know if they looked at whether they reduced the number of hours of work though. The Metro card, again, is a form of financial aid, and then all of the advising, and they were also taking a skills course along the side. So all of that's meant to help make it, if you're gonna be an adult learner and have to be really, effective with your time, they're helping you do that. More generally, one of the most creative things I have seen for those who are trying to juggle lots of things is, and I haven't seen it rigorously evaluated though, is emergency financial aid. So sometimes what happens with students who are trying to juggle lots of things is the car breaks down. It's a $500 repair. They don't have it. Without the car, they can't get to work. They can't get to school. If they can't get to work, they can't pay their rent, and all of a sudden their life falls apart. And so some schools have actually experimented with giving the student $500 just so they can get their car fixed, they can get to work, they can get to school. And at least the non-experimental evaluations look like that's pretty effective. Again, it's more in the side, we can't give them more time, but you can try to make it that the way that they're trying to juggle makes it more effective.
Thank you. I'm curious, do you think that public perception of higher education is part of the problem, or is that in a good spot? And can it be part of the solution?
Is public perception of higher education part of the problem?
And can it be part of the solution?
Part of the solution?
Changing it.
I don't know that the public has such a bad perception of higher education. I don't know, maybe someone wants to correct me on this. Yeah? No? I mean, I think that people are worried, so, especially after we were talking about this at lunch. One thing I saw with the Great Recession is unemployment rates rose for all education groups. And so for the first time, right, I just showed you unemployment rates currently for those with a bachelor's degree or higher is what, 2.9, 2.6%? Really low. And it went up substantially, doubled in the Great Recession. And so, and I think it's one of the first recessions where that was true, where even the highly educated could find themselves without a job. And I think that's what led people to believe, oh my gosh, you mean this isn't a sure thing? There's some risk in my investment. If I go to college, I'm not guaranteed a job. I think that's what has sort of filtered into the bad perception more than anything. But the erosion of the public support for public education has well preceded today. I mean, it's been going on over the last 30 years. And I think it comes down to state governments and state budgets where there's other needs that are really pressing. Healthcare being one of them, I think is crowding out expenditures on higher ed. Another factor, which again, Ron and I have spoken about this a bit, is that if you think about what the deal is, what the bargain is with the state strongly supporting a higher ed system, is that you come to, I'm from California, so you come to UC Berkeley, you get educated at California, you stay in California, so the taxpayers largely subsidize your education. I stay in California, I'm going to give back to the state in terms of higher tax revenues and all the other things that come from me being a better citizen staying in California. So that's an intergenerational deal that is being made. Current taxpayers fund my education, I'm going to fund their kids going forward, et cetera. If now people are much more mobile, so I go to UC Berkeley and then I move to Minnesota, so the taxpayers of California now paid for my higher ed, and then it's the taxpayers in Minnesota that are benefiting. Right? I think as you see that, and education used to be much more provincial. People would just stay in their state. We've become a much more mobile society. The way I think about it when I think about labor markets, I think at the 2-year college level, associate degree level, those are still local labor markets, but at the bachelor's degree level and higher, we're talking national labor markets. So I think in another level, in some ways, financial aid and the subsidization needs to be more of a national investment than at the state level.
I know for the complicated political issues, but if public institutions were tuition-free, how do you think that would impact enrollment and completion for these at-risk?
If public institutions were free? I mean, I think many people would want to enroll. The price would be very low. I mean, the price, you have to realize community colleges already, the price is negative, right? The net price is negative, so it's essentially free. It's basically free. It's also very low at public institutions. If it were lower, I would expect, even more people would want to go. On the other hand, institutions can only absorb so many students. So I think what you would see is they would have to tighten up how not everybody can just go just because the price is zero, unless the institutions are going to hire more faculty, hire more support services. A lot of public institutions don't necessarily have residential dorms and so they don't necessarily have to scale that way. But there are a lot of other services that they have to scale if they're going to have more students. So just because, so it becomes a very big public investment in order to make that happen. So I think it would probably first affect the quality of our institutions, but I'm not sure. The price is really pretty low now in public institutions.
Do you think that vocational training sort of encourages inequality by placing disadvantaged children into sort of those low-income jobs versus sort of the more cognitive skills that you mentioned are having an increasing importance in today's society?
So you're thinking more at the high school level,
yeah,
for example. It's something I worry about, and when people say to me, "Ooh, we have to look at the German apprenticeship model, and that's what we really should be doing. We should be encouraging more." And I say, there were times when we did more of that, and that was exactly what happened. Was we got really bad tracking based on factors that we weren't very comfortable with. So then we decided, no, we should have higher expectations for everybody and got rid of it. So we have swung back and forth, and now we're back on the people saying, ooh, but maybe we should have more vocational training. Because if we could really, I don't believe everybody should go to college myself. And I really wish our K through 12 system were stronger so that people finished high school ready for whatever career. And I think that there are careers that are more vocational that are actually pretty high paying. Where you still need some good cognitive skills, but you could get them in high school if our high schools were doing a better job. But I worry a lot about our educational system being able to help students make those kinds of decisions without it getting correlated with all sorts of, with race and class, et cetera. So I don't know that I have the answer. I don't think everybody should go to college or needs to go to college unless that's the only way in order to get the skills that you really need.
Question for you about the current focus in the community college and world on completion as an outcome, and just thinking about all the policies really treating that as the goal. And I just wonder, given your past work on the returns to credits, and I don't know whether I learned this from your work or just some other work about, it seems like returns to credits, credit accumulation can be linear in credit.
Yeah, that was me.
And if that's the case, then, is the focus on completion kind of dangerous in a sense, because it might encourage, if that's the metric for success, then it encourages institutions perhaps to avoid people they don't think are going to get the whole way when they might be accumulating some smaller amount of credits that's still valuable. And then, and other things like in the ASAP work, one of the things that really strikes me about that is that, VRC and others really focus on the fact that the increase in graduation rates is kind of higher in percent terms than it is in cost. And so the cost per degree is falling. But that's not true about the cost per credit. And so, whether there are like these sheepskin effects or not really matters for thinking about, whether the policy overall is a good idea. So I just wonder whether.
Yeah, so as part of my dissertation, meaning this was like 200 years ago, I did some work with Tom Kane where we looked at credits in two-year colleges and credits in four-year college and found that for each credit actually earned, the credits were that the return was about the same. It was actually that work that led me to worry about completion though, because if you actually graph the number of credits completed among those who started in the two-year college, it was really very few. So yeah, a credit is worth a credit, but if you don't, you also get what you earn, so to speak. So if you don't complete very many credits, you're not moving very far. So I agree with you. Like I personally am not worried about the credential per se, but I do think that people acquire human capital by being in school. That's one way to do it, and that I think people should have more human capital. So that's my focus on the completion, is actually acquisition of human capital. It makes me worried though. I mean, the problem is you push one way and it comes back at you really hard the other way. So for example, people are now saying, ooh, shouldn't we give credit for work experience? Maybe. I don't think we know much about doing that though. And if we know anything from the GED, is the GED is not worth as much as a high school diploma. And so there's something about being in school that seems to make a difference in the labor market. So I worry about rushing into it. I do worry a little bit. My focus is more that I think people have to actually stay in school. And then, some people who are going to community college, it's a way to try out college, right? It's a way to just give it a try, and it's low cost. You don't have to leave home. And if you discover it's not for you, you didn't spend a lot of money and time trying to test it out. And so some of the dropout is good, and I think it's healthy. But I think what I worry about are those students who are dropping out because the institutions aren't really optimized for them.
Clearly, the K-12 problem is a big bag. And I wondered to what extent you thought about the role that higher education plays in either the solution or the problem of K-12.
So as somebody who studies community college, there used to be, and I haven't heard as much of this anymore, but there used to be a real complaint and concern that with the existence of community college, which is open enrollment in every neighborhood, it left the K-12 system off the hook. And so it was actually that the existence of that option made it that the K-12 system didn't have to be as good. And there was a time I was thinking about trying to get at that, and I haven't gone on that so far. So under the Obama administration, there were real efforts to try to align the curriculum, K through 12, to be better aligned with the higher ed system. And you might think that's obvious, but it actually turns out even like within the K through 12 system, some of the handoffs are not very smooth. And I think that is one place where the higher ed system does need to work with the K through 12 system so that the K through 12 instructors understand what it means for students to do college level work. And so I think that's part of the partnership. Again, I say that not because I think all students should do you know, a college curriculum. They tried that in Chicago, it didn't work very well. But I think that the curriculum should be aligned so that for those who want to do it, it is possible without a lot of disappointment. Okay, thank you.